I live in the real world, and I fight in the real world. Many of us do. Many of us live in the real world, and many of us fight in the real world. We fight for the future, for our country, for all of humanity, for all the other species. We fight for the planet. We fight for the future. We live toward the future. We are not afraid to choose sides when the moment comes. We are not afraid to understand that there are some circumstances, some moments in history, because we are at the end of history and the beginning of history. There are moments when there are not two sides. There are not both sides. There is no way to be neutral. And there is no way to live in a little bubble in some retreat somewhere, talking big ideas, removed, feeling yourself beyond the struggle that is happening in the streets and in the legislatures and at the ballot boxes all across the planet. But in particular, we're focusing here on the circumstances and the challenges we face in the coming weeks here in the United States. This is the second of 5 talks. Began in July and will end in November. These 5 talks are my commitment to provide you with some vital perspectives and some framework, some context, some clarity about where we are now and what must get done over these next few weeks. In Secret Engine of the World, I outlined 3 deadlines. And this is the first. The November midterm election in the United States is the first of these 3 deadlines. The second is the presidential election of 2024, and the third is the year 2031, which is 10 years from the publication of Secret Engine, which was 2021. So 2031 is 10 years now, it's 9 years. And that's just an arbitrary deadline that I have drawn, and indicating a point beyond which, in my understanding, which goes back decades now, of the climate emergency. The window, we know the window's closing rapidly, but this next 10 years, it's already begun. The climate collapse is already underway. What we're talking about now is to what extent we can mitigate mitigate what's happening and what is coming, and hopefully avoid some of the worst case scenarios. So those are the 3 deadlines. This is the first of those 3 deadlines, November 2022. This is the second talk of 5 talks that I'm giving to provide some clarity around this deadline. Now, all of the images in the first talk that I gave were images from Putin's genocidal attack on the Ukraine. And the images I selected were of women journalists, women in the military, civilian women casualties. Why? Because first, victory in this war is vital for the future of the West and the promise of democracy And two, because the leadership of women is vital for the future of all life on this planet. The ascendancy of the feminine is vital for the future of all life on this planet. Now, the images included in the second presentation are also of women, except for two slides, which you'll recognize when we get to them. But the women whose images I share in this presentation are all agents of the ascendant feminine, whether the United States or the Ukraine or Belarus or Russia itself. And these women are, as I said, agents of the ascendant feminine and engaged in the great battle of our time, as Gandalf called it. And they are engaged at various levels in the great battle of our time, politically, mystically, and otherwise, culturally, politically, mystically. These images are of a young woman, Ukrainian army combat medic. Back in March, she saved the lives of dozens of Ukrainian soldiers. And the same day she was killed by a Russian bomb. Was 25. So the facts on the ground, I've touched briefly on the planetary emergency. You know, it's climate collapse, it's the sixth great extinction, and pandemics flow from the climate collapse and the sixth great extinction. And pandemics are just as integral to the climate collapse as famine and drought and sea level rising and mega forest fires. We've had COVID. We're not even out of COVID. And here's monkeypox. You can try to avoid, you can try to hide, you can embrace delusions if you want, but you and I have to come to grips with the reality of our time. This is the reality of climate collapse and probably successive pandemics. We're dealing in the United States with the big lie about the 2020 election, and we're dealing with all the delusion and disinformation surrounding that, and we are dealing with the fallout from the attempted coup d'etat on January 6th and beyond, because they, not just Trump, they are preparing to go through this, planning to put us all through this again in 2024 and to some extent in 2022. So we'll get into all of that, but these are the facts on the ground. This is where we are. Now, when I was talking last time, in July, the first talk, I was talking about the facts on the ground, and I was noting that Biden's poll numbers had fallen precipitously into the mid-30s, and furthermore, the conventional wisdom, that's in quotes, among political pundits, that's in quotes. That conventional wisdom was that the Democrats would almost certainly lose control of both the House and the Senate in this midterm election, because that's what always happens. Well, first of all, it's not what always happens. It's what often happens. But this would be said with great matter-of-factness in the corporatist media. On my presentation last month, I articulated 4 factors that were driving Biden's numbers down and driving the Democrats' generic numbers down. And no, it wasn't inflation. It wasn't gas prices. No, it's not baby formula shortages or trans rights or critical race theory. Not his age. None of these were the driving factors, but I articulated four other factors that I considered to be significant to tamping down voter enthusiasm and engagement in the midterm elections and confidence in the Democrats. And the first one that and in this last month, it's as if the universe herself had responded directly. Three of these four factors were turned inside out and right side up, and lo and behold, the poll numbers began to rise rapidly for Biden and for the Democrats. One of the negative factors I cited was the understandable, depressing assumption that Trump and his co-conspirators would get away with their brazen but failed attempt to disrupt the peaceful transition of power and their attempt to mount a coup. I said I believed the Garland DOJ would deliver. I said I believed the rule of law would be upheld. I said there would be accountability. Well, less than a week later, the DOJ activity suddenly started accelerating, or perhaps more accurately, DOJ's activity started to become more visible. And then on July 20th, Garland gave a very rare one-on-one interview with one of the major networks, with NBC News, and he emphatically stated in his own voice, quote, "For people who are concerned, as I think every American should be, about protecting our democracy, we have to hold accountable every person," see that in all caps, every person who is criminally responsible for trying to overturn a legitimate election. And then, boom, boom, we learned that two top Pence aides have appeared before the DOJ's January 6th grand jury. So Mark Short and Greg Jacobs, two top Pence aides, testified before one of the grand juries. We know there are at least two, perhaps several grand juries working on aspects of Trump. So someone could no longer say the DOJ was doing nothing, which many people were on Twitter say the DOJ is doing nothing. They were being professional about the way in which they operated. And then a few days later, the FBI executed a search warrant at Trump's Mar-a-Lago resort in Palm Beach, and Trump tweeted, "They even broke into my safe. Well, yes, I'm certain that they made sure they got your safe open. They confiscated 26 boxes. 11 contained classified materials. 2 boxes with about 6,000 in, and 361 top secret documents. And 9 boxes with 27,000 pages and 3,375 classified documents." Now tonight, just as I was, they executed a search warrant on Mar-a-Lago and took away the most secret information, some of the most secret information held by the United States government, from a place that they were not supposed to be, under conditions that they are never. Some of these documents are documents you cannot look at, you cannot touch without being inside of a SCIF, without being inside of a secured, a very secure, very contained, very monitored, very controlled space within the United States government, which Donald Trump is no longer part of. This is just beginning. So January 6th is sedition. This is espionage. These are two different probes now underway into Trump's recent activities and into his henchmen's recent activities. Isn't me? This is all open source. It's in media. It's in social media. It's in newspapers. It's on cable TV. It's all around you. But the question is how to understand, how to read what you're hearing, how to understand what you're reading, and hear what's really being said and where this is really going. But the Justice Department hasn't just been advancing against Trump and hasn't been sending a message to the American people through its probe of national security threats emerging from a fanatical cult that's taken over the Republican Party. It's not just that, because DOJ, Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter, and Ahmaud Arbery's murderers, on top of their first trials, they were sentenced to life in prison for federal hate crime under the Garland DOJ. And Garland DOJ has just announced that they have indicted 4 current and former Louisville Metro police officers in the murder of Breonna Taylor. Black Lives Matter. And bans off our bodies matter. Because the Garland Justice Department has also launched its first big action from the Biden administration task force designed to protect reproductive freedoms. And in this action, the DOJ is suing Idaho, the state of Idaho, over the state's near total abortion ban as it applies to women suffering medical emergencies. That reproductive rights task force is led by Associate Attorney General Vanita Gupta, and she and the task force are evaluating other state actions with possible legal responses in mind. Another negative factor contributing to the precipitous drop in poll numbers for Biden and the Democrats was the Democrats in the Senate's failure to deliver on Biden's $1.75 trillion Build Back Better bill. I talked about this in the July update. Biden was going to go big. It was going to be our FDR moment, but Senator Joe Manchin robbed us of that bold step forward, and repeated attempts to strike a deal on a streamlined version failed. It seemed hopeless by the time I gave that talk, but then seemingly out of nowhere, Majority Leader Schumer announced a deal with Manchin for $740 billion version. Yes, less than half of the original proposal. Nonetheless, it delivered in some big ways on the climate emergency, on pharmaceutical drug prices, and on corporate taxes. Hurtling toward the midterms, we got an FDR-ish moment, after all. Al Gore, told The Guardian about this legislation: "In crossing this threshold, we have changed history and will never go backwards. I'm extremely optimistic that this will be a critical turning point in our struggle to confront the climate crisis." This bill that has now been signed into law will reduce, this bill will reduce U.S. emissions by 40% and take us 2/3 of the way to our Paris Accord goals. This bill can reduce U.S. emissions by 40% and take us 2/3 of the way to our Paris Accord goals. We've never passed anything before. Is it enough? Of course not. Paris itself, in toto, is it enough? We know that. We've known that. But what we need to do in this country in particular, which is still the most influential on the planet, is to get ourselves on track. Inexorably, we need to establish a new baseline. We need the debate to shift from the whether or not this is real. After all, climate denialism has always been a deceit. We need to shift whether that climate denialism comes from Exxon or some poofish quote philosopher unquote like Charles Eisenstein. We need to shift the debate from whether or not it is a hoax. We need the debate to center around, are we doing enough? Are we moving fast enough? The climate upon which civilization itself has been predicated for millennia is collapsing. So the answer will be no, we are not doing enough. We are not moving fast enough. And then we can lean in. We need to move boldly forward. We need to accelerate. We need to gain momentum. The passing of this bill is a profound good, a profound blessing, and we must build on it. It's a great victory for Biden and the Democrats, and for sanity, and for Gaia herself. We're disappointed that some of the things we put in this package originally aren't there. We're going to continue to fight for child care. It's important. We need it. We're going to fight for elder care. We're going to fight for more housing. All the things that aren't part of this package are still very, very important to the president, but we make no mistake about it. This bill is history-making bill for two reasons. First of all, these historic investments in fighting climate change. But there's a second reason, because for 30 years we were trying to defeat the drug industry on this Medicare pricing thing, and we were never able to do it. We've been trying to defeat the climate deniers and the climate legislation, but never able to do it. Tried to defeat the big corporations to a minimum tax so that billion-dollar profit corporations have to at least pay some taxes. These are long-standing generational fights against special interests, and the president and the Democrats have come together and found a way to win those fights for the first time. That is a very historic pivot. But something else happened, which we also addressed in the July update. But now the response is really starting to show itself. The immense power that is there, that is here. So, remember 2004, the midst of the W era. The journalist historian Thomas Frank published What's the Matter with Kansas? How the Conservatives Won the Heart of America. It spent 18 months on the New York Times bestseller list. It explored the rise of a populist, really posturing, anti-elite, funded by billionaires, conservatism, misnomer, radicalism, really. It documented the mind-warping ideology's impact on the politics of the state of Kansas. A year later, ironically, in 2005, while Frank's book about the radical right indoctrination in the state of Kansas was still on the New York Times bestseller list, George W. Bush appointed Samuel Alito to the Supreme Court. Yes, Alito, the deeply disturbed author of the hateful, delusional decision overturning Roe v. Wade. Farewell, stare decisis. Well, what happened in Kansas? What happened in Kansas just this month? An amendment to institute an amendment to the state constitution, a referendum to impose a total abortion ban in the state of Kansas was rebuked. I mean, 6 out of 10 voters voted against the abortion ban. Over 60% of those who voted against the abortion ban. They hid this referendum in a midterm, in an off year. They worded the language of the referendum in a confusing way, so people who think who had to vote, you had to vote yes to vote no and no to vote yes, typical trick. Yada yada yada. They lost 60. They were defeated by a majority of over 60% of Kansans voting that day. So yeah, what's the matter with Kansas? Less is the matter with Kansas today than even a few weeks ago. Because that power, the power of nothing, as I've spoken to it before, is rising again, as it did in 2018. As it did 2018, Me Too, 2020, Black Lives Matter, 2022 is going to be bans off our bodies. It's over. And that's why it's so dangerous right now. That's why the ferocity and the savagery is coming out right now, because they are losing their grip on power. The patriarchy, the oligarchy, the misogynist, the racist, the neo-confederacy, the demographic shift is underway. And it is in alignment with the evolutionary arc of the human race. So these factors all came together to kind of deal with a third of these negative factors. Because I also spoke last month about the negative impact of the mainstream news media, cable news media, the major newspapers, the desire in the the mainstream media, the corporatist media, really, to normalize everything and to try to so okay, fine, Trump's out of office now, let's just get back to normal. Republicans versus Democrats, up and down. What are the poll numbers? It's a horse race. Cover it as a horse race. Two sets of opposing ideas. Normalize. No, this is not. None of this is normal. The Democratic Party is still the Democratic Party, with all of its potential and all of its struggles and all of its humanness. It is still the Democratic Party, but the Republican Party has become a threat, an existential threat. It has fallen into the grip of very, very nihilistic forces. So we don't get to go back to normal just because Trump isn't in the White House. And so they wanted to go out of their way the press really wanted to go out of its way to show they could be as tough on Biden as they could on Trump. That's not where we are. We're never going back there. Because the new normal, the new reality will be much different than the old reality. So this all, how shall I put it? The reality is that a pathology, anti-science, anti-woman, anti-Gaia, anti-black, indigenous people of color, anti-LGBTQ has taken control of one of the two major political parties in this country. This is a very dangerous time. Moving forward, it doesn't matter if the Republican Party is led by Trump or some other depraved successor, DeSantis, for example. This election cycle is a struggle for national unity, sanity, and survival. And the next election cycle will be likewise a struggle for national sanity and survival. So yes, another one of the four factors driving down all the poll numbers for Biden and the Democrats was our dysfunctional news media's compulsion to ignore the facts, to pretend that reality is somehow up for debate, to both sides at all, to pretend the genie was put back in the bottle, to pretend we're off to the races. Circumstances had forced mainstream news journalists to be tough on Trump. Now they would bend over backwards to show that they could be just as tough on Biden, even if there is no there there. But the mainstream news media's desperate attempt to return to its hackneyed horse race framing was upended by the overturning of Roe v. Wade, the cruelty of the ruling, the horror of it, the hatefulness of it. Alito's right-wing SCOTUS majority went too far. Yes, it's Alito's court. Roberts has lost control. Now it's not going to be so easy to deep six Biden and the Democrats. The corporatist media might not be able to save the billionaires above us from paying their fair share of taxes. After all, Nate Silver, 538 forecast for the incipient. Nate Silver's 538 forecast for the first time this election cycle says the Democrats will keep the Senate. It's clear that something's happening here. Oh, yes, unquote. Oh, yeah, it's clear that something's happening here. There are more of us than them. Yes, there are more of us than them. People in a united front for sanity and decency. A coalition of collective conscience. Left, right, center. Liberal, left, right, center. Sanity and decency. Most Americans know that climate change is an emergency and much more should be done. Most Americans oppose the overturning of Roe v. Wade. Most Americans support term limits, an age cap, and a code of ethics for SCOTUS. Most Americans support expanding SCOTUS. These are also facts on the ground. Now, there are more of us than them. There are a lot of them, but there are more of us. We're not split down the middle. It isn't close on these issues unless you don't vote or you throw your vote away on a third-party candidate. I'm looking at you, Andrew Yang, this time. You want to join the ignoble band of the shell of a man formerly known as Ralph Nader and Putin's dinner date, Jill Stein? Really? Quote, how hard to overstate how wrong the red wave take was. Look at the Senate races. Fetterman, Warnock, Kelly, Cortez, Mastow, Hassan, all have public polls at 49 or 50. There are polls with Rubio, Abbott, Kemp, Grassley in the 40s, and Johnson, Vance, Oz, Walker are in the low to mid 40s. In other words, the Democrats are either leading or tied in many of these races, and even the Republicans, the Trump enablers, the Trump protectors, the coup participants, the fifth columnists, the cowards. It's a mishmash. But they are, even the ones that are ahead are within, if you're ahead by less than 5 points and you're an incumbent, you're in trouble. That's where we are right now. Everything can change, but that's where we are right now. I've included a survey of critical races. Every race, of course, is critical now, because they are working to replace election officials. They are working to replace school boards and election officials. They are trying to turn over sane governance and humane governance at every level of society, not just the Congress, the House, the Senate, the White House, and the state legislatures, but in all the way down to the school boards and the election boards in counties all across the country. People are leaving because of death threats and mobs showing up. This is real. The governor of Michigan is a woman Democrat. The lieutenant governor of Michigan is a woman Democrat. The attorney general of Michigan is a woman Democrat. They have spent the last 4 years having their lives threatened, having goons outside their house, terrorizing them and their children. The two extremists who were, quote, trying to spark a second American revolution, that's what McVeigh said, or race war, by kidnapping Governor Gretchen Whitmer and trying her and decapitating her. We have them in a second trial now. They're in a second trial now. Pennsylvania, there's an important race where a Trump handpicked candidate, Trump's handpicked candidate was actually at the insurrection on January 6th and gave a boatload of money to an anti-Semitic website to get his message out in Pennsylvania. The Trumpian candidate for Senate, Oz, Trumpian candidate for governor, Mastriano. In the blog, on the text of my notes on my blog, wordsofpower.earth, you'll find some background on all of these races and some links to articles and tweets and interviews and things that are highlight what's going on. It's really, really stark, and really, really vital that you understand how stark and how crazy it is, and where we are, and what will happen if we allow some of these people to get into power. So I'm not going to go into all of them here. I just I'll urge you, if you're interested, to look at the breakdowns at wordsofpower.earth, and I'll update them each month, and I'll add other races as well. But suffice to say, for right now, the young Mandela Barnes is leading the fifth columnist, Ron Johnson, for the Senate race in Wisconsin. Tim Ryan is leading the Trumpster J.D. Vance for the Senate race in Ohio. In Georgia and in Arizona, two incumbent Democratic senators who are facing serious threats, they're ahead in their races. Representative Val Demings is either tied or ahead of Marco Rubio, depending upon the poll right now in Florida. Right now, in August, 76 days or so, 77, 76 days or so out from the election, we could gain 4 or 5, 3, 4, 5, 6 seats in the Senate. It would be a different world. The filibuster would be fixed. We would pass the child tax credit, make it permanent. We would install the finally get the minimum wage, which was sunk by one person, no, not Mansion Cinema that time. So much has been accomplished. I listed some of that last month. So much has been accomplished already. But if we were to hold the House and have an actual majority in the Senate, so that untoward power wouldn't rest in the hands of Joe Manchin, who has to run for Senate in the state of West Virginia, so it's not like I don't understand. We could be living in a different world. Just like if Hillary Clinton, who was elected really, she won the popular vote in 2016. After 8 years of Obama-Biden, if Clinton had been able to take office in 2016, none of this would have happened. Hundreds of thousands of people died unnecessarily in the pandemic. So much of this wouldn't happen, and we would have gotten back on track with climate change so much earlier. Anyway, this survey of critical races, I'll be updating it through the next update, the 3rd, 4th, and 5th. So, Malcolm Nance, intelligence analyst, U.S. naval officer, retired, American hero. He's fighting right now with the Foreign Legion in the Ukraine, for real. He came back last month to do a quick book tour and raise some money for the Ukrainians. And his new book is They Want to Kill Americans, the Militia, Terrorists, and Deranged Ideology of the Trump Insurgency. I was honored to be at an event, a conversation that he had at the Commonwealth Club of San Francisco, and get in line and chat afterwards for a few moments. But it's a very important book, and I commend it to you. And I want to read you this short passage from it, because it's very important to understand what happens if we do not vote, if we do not get our friends to vote, if people do not return to the real world at least that much. And ideally, let's just say if we don't vote, if we don't understand why we're voting, we vote out of strength, not fear. We vote out of love, not hate. So Malcolm writes, I call this gathering movement the Trump insurgency in the United States, Titus. The people who support Titus look like your neighbors because right-wing, violent extremists, terrorists, insurrectionists, and insurgents are your neighbors. And they want America to take a hard right turn away from democracy toward authoritarianism. This is real. All across the country right now, they are running candidates that want to change the laws of states so that the state legislatures can decide which electors to send to Washington to certify the election. Which electors will vote in each state to certify the election. And in other words, independent of what happens at the ballot box. If they don't like the results, they're just going to, which they tried to do in 2020, they're just going to name their own slate of electors. And then it'll be all over. So while you're having some abstract conversation about how we have to get rid of the Electoral College, which is, certainly true and certainly the most impractical approach of any we could possibly take in this moment. They will use the Electoral College to bury any hope. But the Electoral College can be turned against them, as the people of Kansas showed, as the women of Kansas showed, and those who stand with the women of Kansas showed. There are more of us than them. Over 60% of the voters in Kansas said, no way, you are not going to put, you are going to get your bans off our bodies. That's what they said. So I commend Malcolm's work to you, particularly this book, and I'll read you this second quote from him. They Want to Kill Americans shows how the last 5 years have to varying degrees transformed 74 million Americans. Like I said, there are more of us than them, but there are a lot of them. It's transformed 74 million Americans into advocates for dictatorship and enemies of democracy. Now, some of them will wake up, and some of them will pull themselves together and join the Never Trumpers, and others will just stay home, understand that, this has all gotten too crazy and I'm just going to step away. But there will be a hard core of many millions who have turned into advocates for dictators. That was me there in the middle. Now we're back to quoting Malcolm. Transformed 74 million Americans into advocates for dictatorship and enemies of democracy. The urge to return to normalcy, to forget about Trump and his followers, though emotionally understandable, is the worst possible response we can have to potential future dangers. Now I've included an embedded video of Malcolm's Commonwealth Club event in the notes for this talk at wordsofpower.earth, so you can access that there. But you'll see in the talk, somebody asked him a question about the midterms, and he said, we need a 20% increase of the turnout from 2018, when we took back, when Trump was in the White House, we took back the power in the House and gave the gavel to Pelosi, which was the first step toward taking it all back. And we need to do what we have to do in this midterm. We need 20% more turnout than we had then. It's certainly doable because many people still don't vote. But it's the young people and the women and the African Americans and the Asian Americans who are going to save us. We have to vote, and we have to make sure we have to be willing to stand and to ensure that those words are counted. That is where we are. Because the alternate future is horrific. So I used to say all through from 2016 to 2018, and even before that, people would ask me about the struggle for climate action. People would ask me about the struggle to get our democracy into a healthier place. And I would say, well, I'm wildly optimistic. I would say things are going really well, so we're all in great danger. Over time, people began to understand what I meant about things are going really well, so we're all in great danger. And I don't mean to say I'm not wildly optimistic now, because the underlying fundamentals of why I said I was wildly optimistic are the same. But there has been so much suffering. There has been so much trauma. There is so much despair. There is so much chaos that it just seems inappropriate for me to say I'm wildly optimistic. So now when people ask me how it's going, I say I'm grimly confident. So if, like me, you live in the real world and you fight in the real world for the future, for humanity, for all the species, for Gaia herself, I urge you to maintain a grim confidence and lean forward. The polls are encouraging. In its madness, the GQP is devouring itself within fighting. Voters are turned off by GQP's toxic extremist agenda. I should go back and read you the Texas state Republican Party platform, but you'll find it in the notes. And the demographic shift, younger, more diverse, and the rise of women, the demographic shifts in the United States, that's what I'm talking about. And the evolutionary arc of humanity, the end of the matriarchy, and therefore the end of the oligarchies, and the rise, the ascendancy of a new feminine. This is happening if we can hold our ground and expand inch by inch, foot by foot, yard by yard, mile by mile. It's happening. Can't succumb to despair, can't succumb to confusion, can't succumb to exhaustion. Grimly confident, lean forward. First of 3 deadlines. I say these deadlines are either doom-defying or doom-defining, depending on the outcomes. Again, the an embedded version of this talk and other related video is at wordsofpower.earth, along with all of these slides and texts and links and tweets and all kinds of other information. And I will speak to you again in September.